Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 567. Releasing October 27 in theaters across the US is After Death, a documentary that explores the phenomenon of near-death experiences as told by survivors who came into contact with the afterlife. A beautifully crafted and soul-stirring exploration into the scientific and spiritual ramifications of a profound experience beyond our earthly realm. After Death is a must-watch for believers, skeptics, and anyone who asks the question, what happens after we die? And for everyone out there listening, you can go to angel.com/after death and you can find out where you can get tickets, whereabouts After Death is playing in the cinemas across North America. That includes Canada as well. I'm looking here. Pre-sales have already gone beyond the milestone and then some, and I think this is going to be a big hit. I believe it's going to be playing like something like 1,800 theaters across North America, and this is such great news because it's a fantastic documentary. And I'm talking to the film's director right now, Mr. Stephen Graves. Stephen, thank you so very much for your time today.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on.
It's really fascinating documentary. I was saying to you after air just how much it really moved me as well. Looking into the history of it, this is a subject matter that you've delved into before. You had a short film in 2017 called Discovering Heaven, which told the story of
Yeah.
Captain Dale Black. For people who don't know, 1969 was like a 19-year-old pilot. He's the only survivor of like a plane devastating plane crash, and he talked like years later talked about his near-death experience from that. I was curious, what was it about his story that really drew you to his kind of like his his accident, his near-death experience? What was happening in your life at that time that really kind of said to you as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, and as a person that this is something you want to a subject that you wanted to dive into?
Yeah. Just to kind of start it off in terms of even the feature and the short, the reason why I even kind of ventured into this whole thing was it was born out of loss. So my wife's only brother, my brother-in-law, Marco, he was actually killed in a car wreck in 2012. And my wife's family, they're immigrants from Croatia, and it's just a family of four, and now all of a sudden it's a family of three. And then just shy of a year and a half after that, my father-in-law had also died. So it's just kind of compounding devastating loss that kind of caused me to ask the question, is there something after or not? And that's when I came across these stories. Originally, there were some people around us that were recommending books of people who had these near-death experiences, which I hadn't heard of before. Um, and the books were interesting. I was very slow to kind of get into the books and read them at first, but it was actually an audio interview that I first stumbled upon with this doctor, Richard Eby, and he had fallen two stories and basically cracked open his head and bled out. But he had this profound near death experience, and the way he was describing with such articulate detail what his experience was. He was basically like walking on the shoreline with Jesus and having this very long conversation, and he was talking about this spiritual body that he had, and it was made of light, and all of this detail, and the senses that he had, which were something like 50 senses compared to the senses here. And I was just amazed. I never heard anything like this before. I didn't
Mm.
really know what to make of it. So I read something like 50, not 50 books. I think it was like originally 30 books, cover to cover. And I just couldn't get enough of these stories. And actually, what I was finding was, the individual stories were really interesting, but the layering of the overlapping nature of these experiences was what really kind of caught my attention after, a bunch of books. Dale's was one of them. Um, Most of the people in our film After Death were what I originally kind of planned to make in terms of a feature film. I just had no means of making it. So the reason why I told Dale's story was it was just one story out of the bunch that I just felt like it was interesting. I contacted a bunch of these people, and Dale's was just kind of like, well, if I'm going to tell, if I only had the ability to tell one story initially, and so I just kind of selected Dale's. And his story, I mean, he was the first person that I got to sit in the interview chair and talk to, face to face, and hearing his experience. And it left a lasting, profound impact on my life because I'm hearing about he crashed in 1969 in Burbank, California, into this monument called the Portal of Folded Wings, which is this, I think, 70-foot structure into this kind of upper dome area with two other pilots in a cargo plane. And basically, he ended up becoming the sole survivor of this crash. But it was significant enough that it made the headlines of the LA Times the next day. And there was also an NTSB investigation. And so there was a lot of evidence to kind of back up, the account and the crash itself. But Dale was a transformed man, and I think that's what I was really kind of drawn towards. His daughter talks about, because he didn't tell his story about a near-death experience for years after he had this. It was kind of miraculous in the way that he healed after. They didn't think he'd ever be able to fly again. He desired to, and so he was actually fully healed up and flew 1 year after the crash, the same flight path. And he was talking to the tower and saying that he dedicates the flight to God. And it's just like crazy miracle that he even did that. But his daughter said that she grew up, with him, and kind of thought he was a little bit crazy
Mm.
because he kept giving all his money away. He would grow up like these big airline, businesses and stuff like that. He had fleets of planes, and every so often he would just be like, "Nope, not supposed to have this," and he would just give it all away. And so he just lived his life completely different. She thought he was a little bit crazy, but when he eventually came out and told, the family, what he experienced all those years ago, they were like, okay, that makes a lot more sense. So anyway, I told a 10-minute story for, yeah, like you said, discovering heaven as sort of a proof of concept, because that's all I could do, with my abilities at the time. And then that got me connected with Jason and Jens at Cypher Studios out in California, and they had just put out this beautiful film called The Heart of Man in 2017. And we just felt like it's this perfect kind of melding of worlds. They've done the theatrical thing before, made a beautiful film, and I'm about to endeavor on this thing of making a feature. And they saw the vision for it, got behind it, and that's what kind of started the path of making After Death.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Fandango. Get the latest showtimes, guaranteed tickets, browse Rotten Tomatoes scores, and watch trailers with Fandango, the #1 movie ticketing app. Once you start transitioning over to the feature, the people you got in touch with previously in regards to talking about whether you'll be interested for an interview, were many of those same people featured in the documentary now, or after the short? Did that open up a world to even more people with these experiences as well?
Well, it's interesting because I don't know how a lot of them kind of agreed to, years ago. Yeah, it was like before I even made the short. They were interested. I think they were just kind of interested in particularly the why I would be doing this, right? I'm not just like a typical director or producer out there that's looking to just make, an entertaining piece. I
Mm.
just personally really needed to know, is there something after? That's my why. And and I really cared about them and their stories, right? I intend always to do their story justice and not, twist it in any way. Just tell it as it is. And I did that with Dale's. The short did help kind of earn some, I guess, validity in, okay, it's not just the quality, but also the intention. I'm not going to mess with your story. This is just, as it is, I'm going to tell it. And so we probably had, I would say, 8 or 9 of the stories uh, before we started production that they all had agreed to. And then, any kind of documentary goes, you start chasing, new stories and trying to find something different and add to it. And so we, in total, I think it was 14 different people that we included in the film in various segments, and they had clinically died between seconds to the longest we have in the film was Dean Braxton, which was an hour and 45 minutes. And he's a smaller segment of the film, but it's amazing amount of time since they declared him dead, which means because that term near death experience is a little bit loosely used, we define that as clinical death in the film. So that means, your heart had stopped and/or that the brain had ceased to have any kind of brain function. So it's supposed to be, on both ways, and then it would be stopping breathing as well. So it's total, you know, that's clinical death as we would define it from cardiologists and neurologists in the film.
Speaking of which, when you talk to these philosophers, professors, and cardiologists, psychiatrists, when you approach them for the film, is the intent on your behalf to try to just bring this down to more kind of like an academic level? Because where on one end a testimonial from a person has an emotional, personal perspective, I think what is really impressive about the documentary is that we're going to go underneath the layers of the emotional and kind of go into the, I always have a saying that I have for myself where I call science understanding the mechanics of God's creation. That's kind of like my philosophy on that. And to me, that's what it seems like you're doing here. You're trying to get into the mechanics of this kind of what is happening here. Is that the intent on your behalf?
Yeah, it's kind of like we took the approach of from a skeptical perspective. Even not everyone that was involved in the production of the film really believed in these stories. I was years into this kind of research as the director, and so I definitely was convinced along the way that that there is something after. But trying my best to remain objective and all that. But we did have people that were included, on the producer side that were a lot more skeptical, and that really helped because I think entering this project with that tension of halfway between believing and totally disbelieving, you kind of so basically we took the approach of we're trying to speak to the heart and to the mind. So I think these stories of the near-death experiences, the people who actually clinically died, a lot of their accounts are going to speak to the heart because it's an emotional roller coaster and their life had been transformed. Um, but the clinical kind of scientific studies of it, there's a lot of evidence to kind of back up these cases, and that was kind of to speak to the mind. And I should say that it's not every single person that's involved in the film even believes in life after death. We have Dr. Zamar, who had this incredible study that broke in 2022, which we're very fortunate to get him involved in the project. It made headlines all around the world, where he has the first ever recording of a dying human brain, which we all thought this must have happened before. And actually, to Dr. Zamar's surprise, even when they submitted the papers, they assumed that there had been a few counts like this before, and it turns out under acute clinical environments, this is the first one that's ever been done. Where it's extreme detail. They actually had the scalp removed, and these probes were actually in the brain because they're basically trying to stop this patient from seizuring, which they did manage, but unfortunately, the patient his heart had stopped, and there was a no resuscitation order from the family, so they could intervene. And so minutes after, they realized, oh my goodness, like we have a recording of the first dying brain. And it was really interesting because although it's just one case, and it's it's of a seizuring patient who's has drugs and things like that in his system, so it's not the perfect case. It's still very interesting because we kind of explore both the spirituality side to it, obviously, with these experiences, but then also like at what point do we die? Like what is that threshold of death? And sort of the film kind of like investigates that, I would say, on a deep level, and even asks that question: what is the point of death? And is there sort of this line? And the line seems to be both on the spiritual level as well as the physical material level, because it seems that the brain does continue on for a small period of time. We don't know how long yet, because there's not enough data out there. But then also in the spiritual side, many of the people who have these near-death experiences talk about there's this barrier that they come in contact with, and they know that if they cross that barrier, just instinctively, that they cannot return to their body. It's just this is a point of no return. And Dr. Sabin says in the film, a line something like, "How do we know? How would you know if that's truly a line that maybe is final death?" And we can't know because we can't interview anyone who has gone over that barrier because they just haven't come back.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you love. Timing-wise, I'm trying to figure out, at this time when you're doing the movie and the interviews, COVID was in full swing, is that correct?
It was. We started production right in early 2020, and the whole world got shut down right when we were about to begin the interviews. It was going to be a very simple project, in terms of logistics. Everyone was going to fly into California. It was going to be very simple, do this run of interviews, and no, the whole world shut down. So we were flying cities basically all around the United States when no one else was flying, and the rest of the world was shut down. But we're also interviewing doctors who some of them are the heads of their departments in hospitals and have to get hospital clearance, and as well as all the crazy restrictions. And then on top of that, trying to sit like the distance apart, all layered up with masks, and trying to have a very intimate conversation and get people to talk about things that they otherwise don't want to open up about, get very emotional, and while trying to speak through all these layers, it was very complicated, but I'm glad it worked out.
The other thing that is fascinating about that timing is that you're talking about mortality, you're talking about death, you're talking about the afterlife during a time where death was in the ether, it was in the air.
Yeah,
Everywhere you turn,
yeah,
it was a reminder of our mortality. I'm sure
yeah.
that type of environment will bring about an even more sense of intimacy in regards to the subject as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the whole world's asking that question at that point. But I think even, today we have wars, happening around the world, but and this is not a new thing. Humans have always been asking that question, what happens after we die? And so I feel like it's one of the biggest questions that we face, and death affects every person around the world. And that's actually why it was important for us to investigate this, even on as much as we could, a global scale, because like I say, it was 14 people in the film, and there's people from different countries outside of North America. One of the objections I would say, from a material perspective and point of view, let's say like a more atheist perspective, would be that perhaps our consciousness is just our material brain, right?
Mm.
And so you could argue that if people are seeing, let's say, Jesus and things like that, then that would just be because if they're in the United States of America, culturally they'd be at least have that kind of, I don't know, they'd be exposed to that in some way throughout the course of their life, and so the brain might subconsciously be eating some of that up, and then when you die, you're just seeing what you've been exposed to. But the interesting thing, what we started to unpack with these stories from all around the world is, no, that's actually, in fact, a lot of people were seeing things that were completely counter to what they either believed or culturally were exposed to. Steve Kang, who's in our film, he was born and raised in South Korea. It's so, at the time when he was born and raised, it was so insulated from Western culture. It's a little different now, but they didn't have televisions in homes. They don't have movie theaters in their area. There's no street preachers, and there's no access to the Bible. He was Buddhist by default because that's just the religion of the country. That's the religion of the culture, and he took it very seriously. His family is very devoted, and so he was raised to believe something very specific, philosophically, about the afterlife, and which was basically like layers to heaven and layers to hell. And you basically work at attaining these certain levels, and you have basically agency in the afterlife. So you have the ability to kind of move around in these spaces and work on yourself and all that. And to his surprise, when he unfortunately, had died for a little while, he came into this world where there's a different set of rules, is how he describes it. It was like a different set of awarenesses. Um, Paul Ueda, who is also in the film, talks about, again, also very surprised that he has no control over the space that he's entering to. And Paul Ueda had a hellish experience, and he's falling into this void, and he's wondering why he thought he was, I'm a good person, I haven't killed anyone, I haven't robbed a bank or anything like that. And the more he thought about why he shouldn't be there and trying to kind of get himself out of it, actually it only increased the speed of which that he was falling into this place. And eventually he had called out to God, and that's kind of a repeating element to a lot of people who had these hellish experiences, where that they were given this opportunity in sort of like this in between state of dying to call out upon God, and to save them, and of course, that's who comes and pulls them out of it, which I think is amazing. That took our hero story, Howard, from a university professor, an atheist, who was decades into that belief, surprised that his consciousness does exist and continue after he dies, seeing his dead body, having a terrifying hellish experience, but then remembering as a small child, at one point he was brought to like this Sunday school, and he's shown this very simple song. I think it was "Jesus Loves Me, This I Know," just simple rudimentary words. And he thought as a little kid, Jesus is sort of like a superhero, and if it's like he's scared of the dark or whatever, he would maybe call upon him. He doesn't know why he remembered that all of a sudden, but then he was basically told, like, externally, this voice spoke to him and asked him to pray, and he didn't have the words for it. He had no idea what to say because he has no context. I don't even know what prayer is. But then he started remembering certain things, like he would say, I don't know, God bless America, and just these random things, whatever came to mind. But when he started doing that, these beings that were around him physically they were pushed off a ways. And when he called upon Jesus to save him, this man of light comes, and he would describe, I don't know if this part's in the film, but he described in the interview, this man that stood before him was the equivalent of 1,000 burning suns.
Mm.
He said if he was standing before him in the flesh, he would have been incinerated. But there in the spirit, it was like this overwhelming, unconditional love, a love that you cannot experience here on earth. It's this absolutely overwhelming, overpowering, unconditional love. And that's what was like emulating from this man of light. And that's something that's very common in near-death experience all around the world.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Gift Card Store. Australia's leading provider of gift cards, Gift Card Store offers a variety of prepaid MasterCard and Visa cards in physical or e-card format. You can even design your own card as the ultimate personalized gift. With Gift Card Store, you can gift the gift you know they will love. You just explained like one of these scenarios. What I find incredibly impressive about After Death is that it's a documentary that is very cinematic. The visuals in the film is fantastic. First off, the cinematography by Austin Straub is great in the movie.
Amazing.
Whereas it's the reenactments or the interviews, just the lighting and the imagery is like this beautiful, thick imagery, almost kind of like bronze imagery in some cases as well. I just love the color palette. I love everything in it. But when it comes to the dramatizations of these experiences that these people have, which in one person's words says there is no earthly words that do it justice. Yet you have to somehow try to do that. So you can try to just give a little bit, an ounce, an inkling of what it would be like. And the imagery that is presented in the movie is just, it's mind-blowing. It's breathtaking. It really is. It's kind of thing like you might see in like a Terrence Malick film or something like that. Like it's fantastic. It blew me away to the point where as I'm watching it in my screener, I was just like, this is a movie I need to see. I would love to have seen on a big screen, because I think everyone needs to see it in the cinema for that reason. When you come about getting these experiences and you need to put it onto film, how do you go about doing so? I know you have the guide, the words as the guide, but to try to translate that to a medium of filmmaking, I'm sure that would have been on one hand exhilarating, but on the other hand a very incredibly difficult process to go through.
Yeah, daunting and terrifying, I would say, to try and do that. But also, it's not just the visuals; it's also the music. Hannah Parrott, our composer, had created this absolutely stunning masterpiece of music to basically join the film and carry us along sonically and bring us to those places of heaven and hell and this afterlife experience. But for her, she would probably describe the same words, that it was terrifying and daunting. Well, actually, we were using temp scores from people like Hans Zimmer and these, incredible composers. And, it's like, Hannah, you got to create something better. So on top of, trying to create something that brings us to this celestial place that we can't go to and hear, and people are describing the sounds of heaven. So it was ambitious, and it was daunting for sure to attempt both sides, visual and audio in terms of experience. But I would say the approach that we took was to do something different than the typical. I think, a lot of times in film, heaven is represented as, typically it stays in the clouds. It might have cherubims or, gates or whatever, something like that. And it doesn't kind of branch out too far from that. As a kid, I would always look up at the stars at night. I was always just enamored by, oh my goodness, like what is above us here? There's just something surreal about space, and we can observe it. It's not something that's philosophical. This is above us. It actually exists here, and we can use telescopes and different things to see as far deep into space as we can. And we're sending things, far further away and getting these beautiful images of galaxies and all that. This just for me just causes me to wonder and in awe of creation and what is it out there and what does it mean to be alive. And so I wanted to kind of use some of those visuals as inspiration to ground this film in a way that seemed a little bit more tangible. So there is a lot of kind of cosmic imagery, or at least kind of inspired by cosmic imagery. And we did Thomas Vance, this incredible VFX artist based out of Paris, France, had an actual practical approach to doing a lot of the visuals that are represented in the film. And he's messing with all kinds of chemical reactions, explosions, fusing light and gold and all kinds of things, together to create this beautiful kind of cosmic imagery. But also there was another thing that kind of acted as a source of inspiration, which is sort of the heaven visuals, and anytime there would be like a reference to God. So Dale Black described at one point to us in his interview that I asked him if there's anything on earth that kind of reminded him of heaven, or that experience, or the love that he'd felt in heaven. And he said there's one thing that he's seen on earth that brings him to tears. And he says it's not at all close, but it's the closest thing that you could see on earth. And what it was is he described it was the atomic bomb explosion. When there's tests and there's footage of the tests of an atomic bomb, he said the first split second when it goes off, there's this absolute overwhelming white light that appears. And this is before the blast and the mushroom cloud and all that kind of stuff. He says this pure white light that comes from the beginning of that explosion, he says, is like a very dumbed down, dull black and white, image of the light that he saw in heaven. And so we kind of use that actually as a bit of an inspiration. It's this, terrifying, but also, amazing and, a wonderful kind of visual of that first flash. Use that as a source of inspiration, as well as kind of the surface of the sun and but people are saying, like the burning of 1,000 suns, what would that look like? And so we started to kind of mix around with all kinds of different approaches practically. A lot of it was filmed practically and then kind of layered in visual effects with other practical components. And that's kind of how we ended up with the visuals, what you see on the screen. And like you said, Matthew, I think this film is best experienced on the big screen because
Yeah.
in a dark room, and you have these massive speakers, and we're mixing, and we actually mixed in Dolby Atmos, so it's this beautiful, like totally submersive surrounding experience. And it's just the pairing of the sound effects and the beautiful score and the visuals kind of bring you there. I think temporarily, it's like get you as close as we can in a visual experience in the theater. But that was our intention, to kind of draw you into what these people are describing.
Please support Matt's movie reviews on Patreon. Get access to exclusive content, request movie reviews and top 10 lists, and help support my work. Please click on the Patreon link in the description below. Final question. You start this journey all the way back 2012, seeking answers in regards to what is there after, this earthly realm. You've gone through the process of short of a feature film, talked to so many people, testimonials, experts. Now that the movie's done, it's coming out tomorrow in North America. Do you feel like that you've reached some conclusions, at least in regards to what is out there? Are you still seeking more answers in regards to this?
I think there's parts of it that we're never going to know, fully. I mean, we kind of hit to that in the film. And I would say for audiences, we want people to kind of get there on their own. For me personally, um, I would say, yeah, it's many years into this and exploring. There's a Dr. Jeffrey Long he had studied over 4,000 accounts from all around the world, and like I said, we had the privilege of speaking to people in countries all around the world who had clinically died and had these experiences. And I don't know, there's just, I would say, like kind of an overwhelming amount of evidence that points to at least that the soul does continue on, that the spirit continues on, that you don't just die and that's it. I think it'd be, I don't know that I could ever go back on that. I think there's just an overwhelming amount of evidence personally, that it does go on. And I think now it's just more of a matter of narrowing down, what exactly is it in the afterlife? Now that's kind of the next step for anyone in that journey, is kind of, we explore things like heaven and hell is the typical kind of description. Not everyone would use those words. Many people have different words to kind of describe the places that they went, but sentiment is the same. This is God's domain in heaven, where it's life and love, and death doesn't exist there. It's only hope, joy, peace. And then there's this hellish area, or the void, or whatever people might call it, which is the absence of light. It's the inverse of light. It's not with lights off. It's not the blackness that we might see on a starless, cold night here on Earth. It's the inverse of light, almost like a black hole, and it's only death, and it's only hopelessness, and it's the absence of God. It's the absence of anything good, and it seems to be only these two places. And so it's just kind of, the next step logically would just be asking the question, what gets you there? Is it me that can do enough here on earth to get me there? Or, the Christian story is that God sent his only son, who he had created, which is God in the flesh, who had died, basically for our sins, and that he bore that so that we could enter the kingdom of heaven, because none of us are good enough. None of us can do it. That's the Christian story. And of course, there's different religions and different philosophies out there. And I would just hope that people kind of, explore that and ask those questions. And I think, that's what we're here on earth for, to do that.
And people can do that this October 27, After Death, in theaters across North America. You can go to angel.com/tickets. /tickets /after death. I mean, it's just an amazing documentary. It really is. And I feel so fortunate and blessed to have watched it. I'm always on the lookout for, myself being a Christian, a Catholic. I'm always on the lookout to look for films, whether they be documentary features or feature films, what have you, that deal with material like this. And I got to say that After Death is just an incredible watch. It really is. And so congratulations to you, Stephen, and your team. And hopefully, tomorrow a lot of people are going to watch this, talk about it, and don't forget as well, everyone out there, pay it forward as well. Get a ticket for someone else that you know or you love, or to the person just like behind you, buying themselves like a popcorn and going to watch something else. Give them a ticket to this film as well, and watch it and get this thing going, because I think this film not only has the potential to be a big money maker in the documentary realm, but I think it has the potential to really touch a lot of people. And I think it's something we really need in this world right now. We need I think one of the testimonials in the film is they said it's all about love, and I think it's something we need more of, and this is something that the movie really does share in that way. So thank you for that, Stephen, and congratulations to you.
Thank you so much, Matthew.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.